I'd arrived in Sao Paulo a few weeks before. I was working a protection detail for the kind of people who need protection in a town like this. And what kind of town was this? One where I didn't speak the language and they didn't water down their drinks. So for now, we seemed to get along just fine. Of course, that was about to change.
Hi there, my name is Dalfridge, and this is my review of Max Payne 3, Adventures of the World's Worst Bodyguard. The first two Max Payne games were two of the quintessential games of the PlayStation 2 era. They're both great examples of the third-person shooter genre, as well as great examples of video game storytelling. My enjoyment of these games has not waned over the years. Even though I still own them both on PS2, I rebought them both on Steam a couple of years ago, and more recently I bought the first game when it was re-released on iOS. When I first heard that a third Max Payne game was in the works, I was both excited and apprehensive. Well, on the one hand I was a big fan of the franchise and looked forward to the return of Max and his world. On the other, it had been 9 years since the last game, and it was hard to imagine it would be as good as the preceding two games, especially with the addition of the nostalgia factor. Imagine my surprise when I started to play and I was soon transported back to 2003, shoot-dodging my way through corridors as Max Payne once again.
Thank God he had left. A minute more of his drivel and I would have had to put a bullet in him myself. It soon turned out I wasn't the only one.
As is the norm for Max Payne games, we start at the end. Max is bald, overweight, bloodied, beaten, and standing over the soon-to-be corpse of someone he clearly isn't a fan of. As Max narrates the story of how he got to this point, we flash back to a party scene. Max is working as a bodyguard for the Brancos, a rich Brazilian family who are somewhat famous in Sao Paulo, when the party is suddenly crashed by a group of masked thugs. This becomes something of a theme as we progress. Max and his partner Raul are able to fend off the attackers and rescue the Branco family. However, they are less fortunate a few weeks later when the oldest brother's wife is kidnapped at a nightclub. When Max and Raul go to the ransom drop for the kidnapping, they are rudely interrupted by a mysterious third party with a sniper rifle, and as usual Max is up to his neck in a complex plot to save a woman in peril. While not much seems to have changed regarding the plots Max manages to get embroiled in, there have been a fair few changes to his character design. For example, as I mentioned earlier, one of the first times we see Max, he's bald, has a bushy beard, looks a lot older and is a little overweight. This version of Max is one we don't actually see again for around 4 hours after this, which I find a little odd as most of the marketing, and even the front cover of the game case, show Max in this appearance. I assume they're trying to avoid a Raiden type scenario, but it just comes across as a little strange. But I digress. Even when you're playing as classic Max, he isn't quite the same as he used to be. He might have a similar hairstyle and dress code, but he still looks older, out of shape and tired. Alongside these character redesigns, there's also been a large change in the overall style of the game itself. Some of the past noir style is maintained. For starters, the story opens near the end before jumping all throughout the story between Max Payne 2 and now, and telling the story through Max's narration is also retained, as well as the convoluted conspiracy plot. The main difference here is the visual representation of the game. Rather than the dark and moody setting we're used to, everything is bright and sunny. The visuals actually remind me more of films like the Ocean's 11 remake than classic film noir. Now, if someone described the game to me as being like Ocean's 11, I'd probably be completely turned off, but here it does actually work rather well. Of course, if you aren't a fan of the narrator style of storytelling from previous Max Payne titles, and more recently Alan Wake, don't expect this visual change to be enough to change your mind.
Bota essa arma no chão.
Hey, put the gun down. Put down your gun.
Bota essa arma no chão agora.
Slow.
Não faça nada, estúpido. Me mostra o dinheiro.
What's he saying?
Open the bag. Show me it's full of money.
Depressa, porra, depressa.
Easy, pal, easy.
Vem.
The changes introduced in Max Payne 3 aren't just limited to the visual style. There are a few of the smaller things that made Max Payne what it is missing in this instalment. One example of this is there are no TV shows to overhear now. Whereas many an hour, or perhaps only about 5 minutes, was spent watching Lords and Ladies previously, now the only TV show I found was a news report, which was more of an optional plot furthering clue. This is of course a fairly minor thing to remove, but it's the little things like this that made Max Payne the game that it was. The biggest change is probably the loss of the comic book style exposition framing each level. Instead, we now have standard cutscenes, and boy do we have a lot of them. At times it feels like playing an interactive movie and your job is to just shoot your way to the next cutscene, which can be quite frustrating, especially as previously a large amount of the story was told in-game rather than lazily handed to you in this way. We've also seen a loss of the haunting dream sequences which typified the previous games. Instead of demonstrating Max grief to us by playing through his nightmares, it's now just part of the narration and cutscenes. While it's a shame that these have been removed, it's also kind of hard to imagine how they would fit into the new visual style, and it would have been difficult to do without just copying the same scenes from the first game. That being said, there are still some elements of the Max Payne we know and love still present. It should go without saying that the bullet time has made a return, and now whenever you kill the last enemy in a group you get a final kill cam in slow motion which you can also control slightly. This doesn't add anything major to the game, but it can be fun, and if you don't like it you can just let it run at full speed and completely ignore it. There's also a strong old school feel to the game which is mainly due to the lack of regenerating health. The health system is much the same as the previous games, with the slight addition of Last Man Standing, which I'll detail in a moment, which means you have to carefully plan when to use your painkillers to make sure you can survive those hard-going battles. This means there's no time stood around just waiting for health to regenerate, which is a nice change of pace to most third-person shooters on the market at the moment.
It's a nice place you got here, homie.
Thanks for noticing.
Why are you living like this?
Like what?
You know, scratching around? Sitting in bars all day?
Maybe I just haven't found the right guy to put a bullet through my head yet. I just don't know.
I can get you work, Max. Work that only a guy like you can do.
Can you give me work sitting in a bar feeling sorry for myself? Where do I sign up?
Saúde.
Gesundheit.
The controls in Max Payne have also seen an overhaul as they are now much more realistic. Whereas in the original game you could run and your legs would be at a 90-degree angle to your body, now you twist and turn in a much more realistic way. This changes both a positive and a negative side though. On the positive side, it makes the game much smoother and it does look a lot more realistic. If you played Alan Wake, it's fairly similar to that in terms of the fluid animations, but unfortunately the controls aren't quite as smooth. When you perform a shoot dodge you end up lying on the floor, but you don't automatically stand up when you stop shooting. Instead you have to push the analog stick to get up. This might not sound too bad, but it takes a little bit of getting used to and it really breaks your flow mid-combat. The issues with the realistic movement don't just end here either, as it also causes issues with a new feature called Last Man Standing. In previous games, if your damage meter failed and you had painkillers left over, you would just die anyway, as you'd have to preemptively use them to avoid the meter hitting the top. In Max Payne 3, if you have painkillers left over, you go into Last Man Standing, in which you enter bullet time and have a short period to kill the man that would have killed you. If you pull the shot off, you use the pills to survive and carry on. If you fail to make the shot, you go back to your last save. The problem with the realistic movement here is, if you're shot behind cover, you tend to just fall behind it, and instead of last chance you get to shoot the wall a bit before reloading. While this is realistic, it just gets frustrating and wastes your time before you can reload to try and do it properly next time. Apart from this slight last man standing issue, the cover system is implemented fairly well. My only real issue with it is you can't move between two pieces of cover, so you have to move away from your current cover, run out into the open to the new cover, and then glue yourself to it. On saying that, it's probably the only cover system I've seen where you actually always shoot around the cover. In most games you get those slightly awkward bits of cover where you end up shooting into an adjacent wall, but in this game you actually reach around those walls and shoot the enemies instead. The cover system does of course lead to a change in the pace of the gameplay as well. Rather than just running around constantly shoot dodging and dropping in and out of bullet time, now you can play it more like a standard cover shooter and use the bullet time to aim easier. Of course you don't have to play it like this. You can continue to shoot dodge and run around in bullet time if you wish, but you do have the option of which way to play. It is my assumption though that this might not continue to be true on harder difficulty levels.
We'd only been married a short time. By now she had been dead longer than I knew her. I still hadn't really forgiven myself for the Mona business, but I knew that was just grief. The insanity that comes with losing the life you had built. Michelle, I missed her with every part of my being. I hated the world for not killing me with her, and I hated myself for allowing this to happen to her and our little girl. But I knew I had to leave town.
Excuse me. Max Payne?
Somehow, I didn't think he was about to tell me I'd won the lottery.
While on the subject of new additions, there's one rather major one that needs to be mentioned, the multiplayer. There are three main multiplayer game modes to choose from. Deathmatch, which it should be fairly obvious what that is, and can be played either free-for-all or in teams. Painkiller, which is your standard hunter versus hunted game mode, with two characters playing as Max Payne and Raul Passos, with the other players hunting them. If you kill Max or Raul, you become them, and you yourself become the hunted player. And finally, there's the Gang Wars game mode. In this mode, you're placed in an area based on a single player campaign and given an objective to meet, such as take out a specified target, arming bomb sites, delivering packages, area control, and so on. While each of the multiplayer modes is good fun to play, it's the Gang Wars mode that sounds like it will have the most replay value due to the dynamic nature of the objectives changing and it being a slightly more unique experience. Unfortunately, I didn't get to play too much multiplayer as my internet's terrible and I can't stay connected for more than 5 minutes at the moment. This isn't an issue with Max Payne 3 though, this is just an issue with my ISP. The inclusion of multiplayer is a good one for Max Payne, especially as the campaign is what appears to be standard for action games at the moment, clocking in around 9 hours. The multiplayer is the part that adds the most replay value here, as while there are collectibles and several unlockable difficulty levels, there isn't a whole lot of reason to go back to the campaign unless you want the achievements or trophies. It's a shame that the campaign is as short as it was, as I just started to really get into the flow of the game around the time it ended. I'm not sure what the DLC plans for Max Payne 3 are, but I do hope that as well as the multiplayer maps which are almost guaranteed, we also get some single player content. This could be anything from flashbacks showing other points of the plot in Max Payne 3, or even events between previous games. We could also just get short standalone stories showing the further adventures of Max Payne, or even other characters like Raoul. Due to the story style of Max Payne, it'd be very easy to do single player DLC and make it fit in really well, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Max Payne 3 was a game I very much enjoyed while I was playing it. My only real concerns are that due to the new things that have been added, as well as the removal of some others, it makes it feel less like a sequel to Max Payne 1 and 2, and more like a different game entirely. I suppose the big question is, do I think I'll be playing Max Payne 3 in 9 years' time, like I am with the first two games? Hopefully I'm wrong, but as of right now, I can't see this being the case.